Welcome everyone to our Rules of Conduct Enhancements Track 1 Draft Tariff Language meeting. My name is Brenda Corona on behalf of the Stakeholder Affairs team. I thank you for attending our call today for this meeting. We do have a few folks here on the panelist group who will be helping us out. But before we get started, I want to give a quick housekeeping reminder as this call is being recorded and will be posted for informational and communities purpose only on the Rules of Conduct web page. Any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. If you do experience any technical issues, I do have my event producer, Adrian, who will be here to help me out and myself. So let us know if you have any questions through chat. To ask a question, use the raise hand icon that's located in a lower toolbar. You'll hear a beep sound when you're unmuted. At that time, you'll be asked to ask your full name and affiliation. Be mindful if you are asking a question and are going to have a follow-up question to the question, don't unmute yourself. It does block you when you're asking a question. So keep yourself unmuted or don't even touch the mute button on your device. It'll help us out. And then if you do have a chat question, feel free to send those over to all panelists. We'll see them and we'll do our best to answer them during the call. But at this time, we do have a structured agenda today. So for maybe an hour and a half, we will have like the track 1 draft tariff language discussion with David Zutlow, and then we'll have like an open discussion around 3:30. Depending on timing, we might end earlier, but this call will be recorded. But other than that, let's go ahead, Adrian, pass the baton presentation rights to David, who'll kick us off for today. And we have Dennis too, our policy developer, who's also here today for answering questions.
I am trying to share my screen and it's asked, there we go. Okay, looks like I have presentation rights. So good. Okay, just to confirm real quick, you're seeing the tariff language up? Thumbs up. Okay, great. All right, so for this initiative, we got comments from 2 parties on the draft tariff language. It was from Idaho Power and 6 cities. So I'll go through their comments. If there's, anything I say sort of triggers a thought or additional comment, that's fine. And if you had other things that you had on your mind about this draft tariff that were not in the written comments, but you wanted to ask them on this call, that's fine too. But I'll start with the questions, the comments that were submitted in writing, and then we'll go from there. So 6 cities, several of their comments were really more in the clarification or, just rewriting to be more direct about what we're talking about. So section 37.5.2.1, there was some edits there that you would see reflected on the screen. And then just to clarify, what I'm projecting here is the draft tariff you all saw as edited per the comments from Idaho and 6 cities. So you should see there on there 35.2.1 is slightly changed based on some comments from 6 cities about clarifying edits. So substance-wise, we'll move on to section 37.5.2.1.1. 6 cities had a question, and it's really, I think, gets to something that we tried to do here in this rewritten tariff to be more clear about the 3 flavors of meter data problems. So I'll just explain that, and then I'll get to the specific question. So we have now headings for you see on the screen: inaccurate meter data, I'll scroll down, late meter data, and then missing meter data. And these are kind of terms that we use internally and sometimes externally. Okay, I see Tong Wu has a question about 37.5.2.1. Let me just say this, finish this thought, and we'll go back to Tong. Okay, so the general idea here is we have 3 different flavors. Inaccurate here is where you submit something by the initial deadline for the T70B statement, which is T plus 52B T plus 52B. So you make the regular deadline, that's fine. You submit something, but it's not accurate, and you come to the ISO later and say, hey, there was something inaccurate or incomplete about that data. I need to revise it. That's inaccurate meter data. And then late meter data is when you submit nothing by the initial deadline of T plus 52B, but you submit something by the sort of makeup deadline at T plus 214B. And then missing meter data is a distinct violation separate from late meter data, which is you miss both deadlines. You miss the T plus 52B deadline and the T plus 214B deadline. So just again, to reiterate, late meter data is you miss the first sort of binding deadline, you make it up by the kind of makeup deadline. Missing is you never submit anything at all. And then so I'll just get to the 6 cities question. It was, how would you handle incomplete or partial data? Is that inaccuracy or is that missing data? And because there was some language referring to in the inaccurate data, complete and accurate settlement quality meter data. And that is old language or existing language, I should say. But they said it was a little confusing there. We wanted clarification on whether incomplete data is inaccurate data or it's late. And hopefully what I just said clarified. If you have any data submitted by the proper deadline, and then you want to revise it in any way after that, that's inaccurate data. The late meter data and missing meter data are for when nothing is submitted at all. So that was the 6 cities question. I'll pause there, and then let's go back to Tom. I think Tom had a question on 37521.
This is Tom Wu from WAPA. I have a question about this new paragraph regarding estimate meter data. What do you consider as estimated? What we do is we submit actual meter data during the time frame when ISO requires estimated settlement meter data. So if there is no further change, we'll just leave it as it is. Is that okay? Does not meet this requirement? Does ISO definitely require 2 submissions, estimated and actual?
I see. Okay, well, I guess first that I don't, right. So as I understand your question, right, is you submit an estimate by the T plus, whatever the deadline is for like the T plus 12B, I think is the right statement. Mm-hmm. And then afterwards you go, actually, yeah, that estimate was the actual amount, that's fine. Just leave it alone and let it kind of stay there and be processed for all the rest of the settlement process. I guess your question is that okay, or do you need to at some point come and say, hey, ISO, I had that estimated data. I'm just letting you know the data is still good. And if I understand that question, I don't know mechanically, I'm not sure about that. I don't know if anyone from the ISO side can answer that who's on the call, but I think to the paragraph you see here, this is, that I think it's showing up in green because it was moved instead of just totally new. So that is existing language. That's about whether you submit estimated data that's not, a bona fide good faith estimate. And that's what it's saying is like that's not allowed. You can't just submit estimated data that isn't a legitimate attempt at estimating what the data is going to be. So I don't think that paragraph that you were pointing to answers the scenario you were asking about. But as to your scenario, I don't actually know mechanically, or maybe it's in the tariff somewhere. I'm actually not familiar. So I don't know if anyone on the ISO side could answer that. Otherwise, that might just be a question that someone will need to get back to you on.
Another way to do it is don't label it as estimated. To say you have to submit your meter data by that timeline to the extent that you have the meter data, and later on you can change it if you have more meter data or you change your meter data, because meter data is not raw meter data. You have to go through your edits, correction, and all that processes. So when you submit it, it's to the best of your knowledge at that moment. You may be still waiting for other people to provide more data and do your edits. But if you don't have any other edits to make, then what you submit is the actual. If you say you have to submit estimated and then you have to submit actual, sounds like you have to submit twice, even if you don't make any change.
I understood. My hunch would be that if as a scheduling coordinator you submit something, that data would just kind of stay in the system, and it would be treated as the actual data. If you submit it once and you don't change it at all, and then at T plus 52B, then it's locked in as the real data. Versus, in contrast to cases where the ISO puts in its own estimated meter data because you didn't submit anything for the T plus 12B statement, and so then it's ISO estimated data, and that's what you need to replace with your own submission by the T plus 52B statement, or T 52B deadline for the statement.
Yes,
so
exactly.
With that, Powers has her hand raised. I think she might hopefully confirm what I just said or gently correct me. So maybe we'll let Jill answer this for the moment. Jill, you might not have been on the presenter side, so maybe you need to be unmuted. Sorry. Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay. Well.
There you go, David.
Sorry, I was still muting myself. Apologies for that. So what I was going to say was that, we can come back to this question later if there's someone who has a more definitive answer. But I was just going to try to close out the 6 cities comment, say that inaccurate versus late. Inaccurate is when you submit something and then you have to revise it after the deadline of T plus 52B. Late is when nothing at all is submitted. So hopefully that's clear. Do we have any questions with that? Otherwise, I will move on to the next area where we had some comments. Nope. Okay. Well, and then in section 37.5.2.1.2 and 0.5.2.1.3, so the descriptions of late and missing, 6 cities had some, punctuation corrections, and I think the numbering of this section here, missing meter data, was incorrect, and now it's because it was 37.5.2.1.2 twice, so that was wrong. So that's fixed. But then we'll go to 37.5.2.2.3, where Idaho had a comment where they were looking for some clarity. Okay, so here you see SQMD is $1,000 per trading day. The sanction for missing SQMD is $4,000 per trading day. And I think Idaho was questioning, didn't the policy say it would be 3,000, not 4,000? That doesn't look right. And so the answer to that is we think it's correct, but just again to explain, part of what this rewrite is doing is trying to be clear that there's one violation called late meter data, there's one violation called missing meter data, and they are mutually exclusive. And when I say that, what I mean is late, if we go up to the section before it, it says late is when you don't meet the T52B deadline, but you do meet the T plus 214B deadline. So that is the definition of late data. The definition of missing data is you miss the T52B, and then you also miss the T plus 214B deadline. So the total sanction for late is $1,000. Total sanction for missing is $4,000, which is consistent with the current tariff. It's just that the way the tariff is written now,
it's sort of, you get a $1,000 plus you get another $3,000. And that's because it's sort of a little unclear. Like they're sort of both, it's sort of two flavors of late data today, which sometimes we talk about as missing. It's just sort of how the current tariff is written. It's not as sort of distinct as what the two violations are. So here, the dollar amounts wind up being the same. It's just written differently. So hopefully, if Idaho's on, if that helps explain what we were thinking here.
Okay, yes, I see Jennifer Gerard raised hand, so yeah, please go there.
Or Jared, Idaho Power. So I just want to make sure I follow you. So I might be a little confused still, so I apologize. So the late meter data is if you get it in by 214B, correct? But after 52B. Okay. And then missing meter data is missing entirely from what's the time frame on that one again? Can you?
Yeah, it's so the SC misses the 214B deadline as well. And why it's missing is because, there's another tariff provision that says the ISO will not accept any new meter data after the 214B deadline. And so at that point, from the settlement system perspective, it's missing, and it's never going to be added in for settlement purposes because, there's a hard cutoff in the tariff saying we're not going to process it after that point.
Right. Okay. So I think where I guess the confusion was, is it looked like we were saying $1,000 plus another 4,000, but I think what I'm hearing you say is it's $1,000 up until 214B, but then after 214B, it's $4,000.
Right, because then it becomes a different violation. It's missing meter data, and then if you have missing meter data, it's $4,000.
Okay.
But it's no longer meter data because by definition, it can't be late meter data anymore.
And I think where maybe it was confusing too is in the draft final proposal. I think it said 3. So I think that's where it didn't seem to line up with what we had seen on the draft final proposal, but that might have just been how it was laid out in the terminology. So this is what the current policies, or sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But this is what you said the current tariff has today.
The penalty dollars are the same.
Okay. It's just kind of clarifying between late and missing.
So in other words, today, if a SC misses both deadlines, they will get $4,000 per trading day penalty. And so that's, it's the same.
Okay. So really the penalty for missing is 3,000 and the 1,000. So I guess, so really the penalty is 4,000 for missing the deadline entirely after 214. It's not really 3,000, which is what I think I've always thought it was. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, that helps. Thank you. I apologize. I just was a little confused from my understanding of the structure. So thank you.
Okay. All right. So we'll move on from that comment then. In 37.5224, there were some adjustments that we made in the market adjustment section here. 6 cities provided some specific edits, and some of those edits I think pointed at some maybe lack of clarity, but we couldn't do all of them. So let me try to just get it all on the screen at once, and you all can see. Actually, that might not be possible, but in substance, it's the same, but I'll just run through it really quickly. So, and then one of the reasons what we had to sort of tweak was late meter data, like we just said, involves getting the data in by the 214B statement, but missing the T plus 52, sorry, getting it in by the 214B deadline, but missing the T52B deadline. So that's late data. In pretty much any realistic scenario, that data is going to be reflected on a T plus 11M recalculation settlement statement. But sort of technically, the T11M statement is an optional statement, so you can't assume it will all, I mean, in practical terms, it has basically always been done, but it's not automatic. It's not a mandatory settlement statement under the tariff rules for settlements. So, you know, had to kind of tweak this market adjustment section just to contemplate that scenario, even if it's really unlikely. So in the case where you have late meter data, and then for some reason there isn't a T11M statement, here it's saying there would be a market adjustment as well. So that was sort of I'd even call it more of a technical change. But for the case of inaccurate data that doesn't get reflected on the T11M statement, or late data that doesn't get reflected on the T11M statement, or missing meter data, which would never be reflected on a T11M because it's submitted after the hard deadline for submitting data to be included. In all those cases, we have the market adjustment, and then we talk about what the market adjustment is, which is the value of the error calculated, and then based on a minimum price of $10 per megawatt hour, which is existing issue, and then we calculate the market adjustment for each hour, and that's in addition to the financial sanctions specified under the inaccurate, late, or missing provisions. So, for example, in that case where you have late data, it's still $1,000, and you have the market adjustment, and then in most cases it would just be the $1,000 and no market adjustment because the data would be calculated through the settlement system. But in case it isn't, market adjustment would apply. Okay, and then so here we have then the provided however. Those are exceptions that we do not charge a market adjustment if. So one exception is the initial error was to the scheduling coordinator's detriment. So that's an existing rule. And then second, we added this sort of, you know, this idea that I think some parties were pointing out that if the scheduling coordinator is the only scheduling coordinator in the service area during the period of inaccurate, late, or missing meter data, you know, then it's sort of a wash in terms of we charge the market adjustment and then we refund it back to that same SCID. And I think in other contexts we've explained, or in policy process here, we've explained how that, you know, we agree that's kind of a pointless exercise. So we say there's no market adjustment in that case because we're directly, you know, charging the same entity and then handing that money back to exactly the same entity, and that's just, there's no real reason to do all of that. And then, so what you saw in the draft before, just the order of the different statements in this market adjustment section were moved around a little bit, but to recap, then there's a new statement here that says scheduling coordinator must provide reasonable cooperation in providing the data needed. That's to sort of address a scenario where, you know, we need the real data to do the market adjustment, and then, you know, sort of a hypothetical, what if the scheduling coordinator never gives it to us? We didn't want to start sort of creating a new category of penalty for what if you don't give us the correct data to calculate the market adjustment or calculate the 30% penalty, but, you know, having it here saying it's a tariff obligation to, you know, reasonably cooperate, you know, we could, you know, then it's a tariff requirement, we can escalate in some way or another. So it's just to kind of have something to cover that scenario, which, you know, I don't think we've ever been in that, hopefully we wouldn't, but just in case, sort of something there to make sure that we'll have some leverage to get the data needed to make things right. And then finally, the last statement, which is existing concept, we allocate market adjustment charges in proportion to unaccounted for energy during the period of the missing, late, inaccurate meter data event. Okay, so with that, I will stop. I think there were some maybe questions popping up in the chat that I couldn't really see, but I don't know if there's others who have questions or comments, or if that kind of is clear, but I'll pause there and see if there's questions.
As a
Okay,
reminder,
well,
oh,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, as a reminder, if you have a question, please use the raise hand icon. If not, feel free to send it through chat. But I did see a question. I'm looking for it for you, David. You might be able to see it yourself on the list. Let me double check here. Robert from Acosta City of Anaheim. He said earlier, to avoid confusion, just show the sanction of missing meter data to 3,000 plus 1,000, which equals 4,000.
Okay. Right, and so yeah, I guess another approach would have been to say, late is late regardless of, whether you miss the T52B or the 214B, and then it's just a question of is the penalty for missing, the penalty for late is, depends on how late it is. And I think that would have been one approach. I think it was, we wanted to sort of be, more, clear, because then you have two flavors of late data. And that's what we're trying to avoid, is to just sort of have a label for each of the scenarios. Have a very concrete label for you hit the first deadline, but there's something you need to fix about it. And then have a very clear label for what happens if you miss the 52B deadline, but you make the 214B deadline, and then a very clear label and category for if you miss the 52B and the 214B. So that was the kind of the thought process here. And then you don't have to kind of say the penalty for a certain type of violation depends on which flavor of that violation was. So that was the thought process here, and to make it more create more clearly distinct categories. Okay. Well, I'll move on to the penalty distribution language, and then we have plenty of time to come back if there's more questions. But I'll scroll down to 37.9.4, disposition of proceeds. So this is the section that talks about how we how we allocate out the collected funds for the year. And then let's see. So just real briefly, 6 cities had some clarifying edits, just to really change the verb tense to future tense. I'll just, as a sort of small item, I think sort of the preference on tariff writing is just to have active present tense of just saying the CAISO does this, and sort of take it out of the slightly more stilted language of if this happens, then we do this. Sort of want to just have it more active present tense verbs. So, that, to answer 6 cities' requests for those edits, we're trying to keep it consistent in that way. But then to Idaho, there was really 2, I'd say, substantive questions or comments there. So scroll down here. So you see here in the middle, we have this existing sentence defining what an eligible participant is. That's struck out and deleted here, but then we're going to scroll down and we have that sort of concept fleshed out in more detail here. So in this paragraph. So what it said here is you're ineligible if you were A, assessed a financial sanction during the calendar year that was not excused by FERC in accordance with the procedures outlined in Section 3710. B, you were assessed a financial sanction during the calendar year that was later excused because FERC granted waiver. Or C, you would have been assessed absent a FERC waiver. And then D is you're exempt from financial sanctions pursuant to Section 22.9. So I'll explain D first, just to get that one out of the way. That relates to federal power marketing agencies, which are per Section 22.9 and some other legal legal bases, they'll hold sovereign immunity from the penalty provisions, and we've covered that in some of our annual penalty distribution filings, fleshing that out a little more. And we've sort of said in the filings to FERC, you know, they shouldn't be eligible for a cut of the proceeds because they're not at risk of being penalized in the first place. So this D provision is just sort of putting that in the tariff, and then we don't have to, you know, sort of address that issue going forward. But as to A, B, and C, I think Idaho's question is really why is a participant deemed ineligible if FERC granted the waiver? And I think the point here was if FERC grants a waiver, it's saying the penalty, you know, there's some reason why the penalty shouldn't be applied. But if there was a violation that occurred, we think it's appropriate to still be ineligible for a cut of the collected funds. So if FERC says, you know, in the meter data context, for example, since that's a pretty live example, you know, FERC says the meter data penalty was excessive, we grant relief, you know, the ISO shouldn't charge it. You know, there was still late meter data, and that was still a violation of Section 37. So we thought it's appropriate to then say, no, you're not eligible to enjoy the benefits of a distribution of the pool from the other participants that, like you, had a violation. It just so happens that, you know, through some circumstance, FERC decided that the penalty itself was excessive or whatnot. But the intent, if you see in B, for example, you were assessed a financial sanction that was excused because FERC granted waiver of the portions that required assessment of a financial sanction. And I can go back and maybe looking at it now, there might be some room to further tweak this. But the idea was if FERC determines that no violation occurred, so that's one scenario where on the facts, FERC says, actually, there was never a violation in the first place. You know, I think then it would be reasonable to say, in that circumstance, parties should still be eligible for an allocation of the pool. You know, if, however, FERC says, no, you had the violation, but we agree the penalty is excessive, or, you know, you have some good excuse for why the violation occurred and will relieve you of the obligation to pay the penalty. Those are the scenarios where we do think it's appropriate to be excluded from the pool. So that was the thought process here, and I'm looking at this with fresher eyes, and I realized that might not be 100% clear in terms of how A, B, and C are written. So I might kind of review that. But that was the thought process here, and hopefully that gets at the question that Idaho submitted. But we'll stop there and see if you know, anyone else from Idaho or Jennifer, if you're on still, you know, if that gets at what you were asking or not.
Let's go ahead and unmute Jennifer.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, that does help clarify. I do think B and C were a little, I wasn't sure a little bit of the difference between those two. So I think if there is some clarifying language on B that you could make, and that does make sense, that I think the question we had is FERC actually making a determination if a violation has occurred or not in their waiver process? And I think we were thinking we wouldn't know if they would actually be making that determination. So it sounds like from CAISO's perspective, if CAISO has determined that a violation has occurred and let's say FERC is just silent on the matter, then that participant would still not be included in the pool, even if FERC grants the waiver.
Yeah, and I think it would be up to, I mean, the individual participant to say, you know, in their filing, they say, you know, the ISO assessed a penalty of $20,000, whatever, let's say $20,000. You know, this is unjust and unreasonable because, and it could be because it's excessive in light of the conduct that happened, or you could say this is excessive because we didn't even, there was no violation, and so it would be up to, I think, each participant to tee up to FERC why they think the penalty is inappropriate. If they say it's inappropriate because the facts don't support the idea that any violation happened in the first place, if that's the basis of the appeal to FERC, then fine. And then if FERC, agrees, that's the appeal, and then it wouldn't be a case of penalty was excessive. I mean, I think we would, the scheduling coordinator or party should, be clear in its filing to FERC why it's saying it appeals the penalty.
Okay. And I think the other clarification that we were looking for is just kind of the timing. So it looks like during the, could you speak to maybe that?
Yeah, that was the next point you had submitted in comments. I just wanted to finish the thought here. You had said, Part C, why is that there? And honestly, that was because we were kind of drafting some of this at the same time we were dealing with those, the meter data penalty waivers. And so what I had in mind is, if you recall, in, was it April? I mean, I'm sure you personally remember that we were, we filed a waiver in April to say, there's a lot of these meter data penalty things stacking up. We have this Rules of Conduct Enhancements process we just started. Please just let us waive all the penalties from now until, early 2024. Give us some space to just kind of have the stakeholder process, get the tariff changes in place, and then we'll resume penalties at that point. But it's just, it would be a lot better probably for everyone if we just sort of put a pause to this for now. And, that was the filing. FERC did not grant that. But
right.
The idea is he would have covered the parties that were, sort of covered, would have had that waiver request been granted. C was meant to cover the parties there where they didn't file their own waiver, but FERC granted a waiver that a global sort of prospective waiver of the tariff provision. Generally, the thought process was if a market participant had a meter data penalty issue, like say in November, while that penalty waiver globally was in effect, well, they still shouldn't be eligible for a cut of the penalty proceeds. That was the pattern that I had in mind, because I was initially kind of doing some of this. At the time, that was still an active thing. But, honestly, at this point, I think we're probably not going to make a filing like that again, because we kind of got some direction from the FERC orders about what they're really, the way they wanted to do it. So, I mean, maybe C isn't even necessary anymore. So, I think what we'll do is, I mean, in any case, like I said, we had, made some incremental edits to what was posted based on the comments. And then I think what we would do is repost this. I don't think we would schedule another call, but we would repost a new clean copy, or not clean, a new, red line, but, sort of reflecting what we consider the most up-to-date, ready for filing version. And then that would include, like I said, I'll we'll rethink the exact phrasing here to make it more, more clear, because I'm seeing now in A, the way A is written does not exactly draw that distinction between the sanction being excused because it was excessive versus being excused because the facts didn't support a conclusion that a violation happened. So, we'll repost this, and when it's reposted, you'll see, I think, some changes here, and then, hopefully that will make you all comfortable. And then, so yeah, moving to the question about the timing. So, your comment here was requesting clarifying the language as the timing of ineligibility in the event FERC grants a waiver. So just in general, what happens, our processing to this point, and we would continue to process this way, is if a party, gets a penalty, and then they appeal and they meet the tolling provisions that we've talked about elsewhere, then the penalty is refunded, or, it's tolled in some way or another. So at that point, we wait to get a FERC order. And then if, FERC comes back and says, the appeal is granted, well then, fine, it's granted, and then we potentially go back to what we're talking about here. Was it granted on what basis and so on? But, if it's not granted, then we reassess the penalty because it's been refunded or told or whatnot. And then we calculate it based on when the reassessed penalty is. So to be more concrete, let's say party has a meter data penalty in 2023. They file, appeal at FERC, they dispute the settlement statement, all that. So it's pending at FERC, it's 2023, it becomes 2024. FERC comes back and says, we do not grant this. Then the ISO will reassess the penalty, but that's treated as a 2024 penalty, not a 2023 penalty. So it doesn't require any kind of, resettlement, which I think that was part of your question is, does ISO kind of claw the money back and resettle and whatnot? And so with that tolling in place, that's not an issue, but, I think it could be an issue in the case where a party doesn't meet the requirements for the tolling, so they nevertheless file some sort of appeal to FERC after the dispute deadline for the settlement statement where the penalty appeared. So you're still, I think, allowed to do that. It just doesn't qualify for the tolling. But let's say that's the scenario. We charge the penalty, it's assessed, it's collected, but then the entity goes and files at FERC anyway. If that happens, and then FERC comes back and says the appeal is granted and we have to basically refund the penalty proceeds we've been holding on to, I think the first thing we would do is, if something like that were pending, we would try to wait to do the distribution for the year until FERC rules. And we have some flexibility on when the allocation happens. So if there is something like that pending, our first course would probably be just to wait and get that resolved so we don't have to do any kind of resettlement. But in theory, if it came to it, yeah, we would just resettle it. So for example, we collected the money, distributed it out pro rata, and then somehow FERC comes back a year later and says, actually, that appeal is granted. Sorry, I don't know if you see my name popping up there. If FERC comes back a year later and says, actually, give them the money back, we have to give them the money back by kind of taking all the penalty allocation back, re-slicing and dicing that whole pool. So that wouldn't be great, and we try to avoid it. But if it came to it, that's what we have to do. So hopefully that helps answer the question. Okay, Jennifer says the message saying that answers it. Okay, very good. And then I think that was it in terms of the comments that were submitted. Like I said before, if you have, other comments, anything else thinking of, feel free to raise them now. Or, like I said, we'll aim to repost, and then if there's something there, you can reach out to us by email or whatever if you want to, make sure you're understanding it right or whatnot. Okay, with that, I will hand it over to, I think, Dinesh, if you were ready to sort of do any open discussion. I think with that, that was all I had on the draft tariff.
Awesome. Thank you very much, David. Appreciate you walking through that. So yeah, I guess at this point, Brenda, you want to move it to that one slide. And at this point, I'm happy to take any questions. Open discussion is open discussion. Any comments about rules of conduct enhancements? Now's the time.
I don't see any questions in queue unless there's anything, but we did get a good thank you from Jennifer. I just wanted to let you know, David, on that.
One other thing I wanted to mention as I was talking, I meant to point out. So we did, I think, today file the while we're on the topic of penalty disposition, we did file today the proposed allocation for the 2022 penalty proceeds. So that was submitted to FERC today, and I mean, I think that gets served on all scheduling coordinators. So it should be posted on our website shortly, and in case that's something that's of interest, since it's very relevant to the topic here we're just talking about.
Thank you, David. I see Jen from Idaho Power has her hand up.
Or I guess I just, it's the Idaho show today. Just one clarification on that. The penalty distribution, is that posted around the same time every year, or is, I guess I didn't realize that was posted somewhere. And I guess maybe if you could direct me to that, where we can see that.
So, yeah. So that's, it's a FERC filing. We have to, get FERC approval before we distribute it. And that was actually one of the changes in this phase one of the initiative, was to just, provide the same information through, to stakeholders and, post on our website. So there's, transparency about it. But, that's one of the tariff changes here, is to, going forward, not require it be a FERC filing, but just treat it more like a, just a regular settlement allocation that we do in, lots of other contracts. But, until that change is made and approved, we have to go file it with FERC every year as a, as a filing to FERC requesting permission to allocate, and we attach a table, and then the attachments are provided as confidential attachments because it's showing every individual scheduling coordinator's dollars of what they're going to get from the penalty proceeds. But, the filing itself explaining the rationale, what we did, how we did it, and then general information like showing, here's the total penalties for the year. Here they are broken down by category, how many entities had a violation in each of those categories. That's part of the public filing, and that's, if you want, that would be posted on the regulatory part of our website.
Okay, great.
And if you dig around, you can find the filings from every year for the last however many years. Basically the same thing every year, so you probably would get the idea of just seeing this.
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right, with that, Brenda, would you like to close us out?
Of course. So just a reminder for those on the call, we are currently moving along our way through the CAISO policy initiative stakeholder process. We had the tariff posted on the 19th for, we also went to the board on the 20th. But other than that, the next steps is just keeping you all informed through notices for this upcoming Rules of Conduct Enhancements. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or ISO Stakeholder Affairs at kaiso.com as we continue on with this initiative. As a reminder, we do post on the Energy blog, and this post that's recent is the interconnection process. So feel free to look at their blog for any more cool monthly postings. But other than that, we can go ahead and have Adrian close her call a little early. Thanks so much for all the great questions, and we look forward to talking to you all soon. Thanks.
Thank you, and that concludes our conference. You may now disconnect.